Two discoveries, 4 months apart, the same stretch of cold water off the California coast. One was an unborn child. The other was his mother, Laci Peterson, 8 months pregnant when she vanished on Christmas Eve. The man who reported her missing was her husband, Scott. He claimed he was away fishing, but investigators found a trail of troubling details. He had recently bought a new boat, owned no fishing license, and his phone records placed him at the exact waters where the bodies later surfaced. The evidence didn't arrive all at once. It accumulated through receipts, wiretaps, and forensic analysis. When the full picture emerged, every piece pointed to the man who had stood before national television cameras, pretending to look for his wife. This is what the official record shows.
Laci Denise Rocha was born on May 4th, 1975, in Modesto, California. She was the younger of 2 children raised by Sharon and Dennis Rocha. Those who knew her described her consistently the same way: warm, outgoing, and easy to be around. She was a cheerleader through high school and went on to study ornamental horticulture at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo. Her parents separated early. Her mother, Sharon, built a long relationship with Ron Gransky, who helped raise Laci and her brother Brent. Her sister, Amy Rocha, worked as a hairstylist at Salon in Modesto. Sharon and Laci spoke by phone several times a week, without fail. Scott Lee Peterson was born on October 24th, 1972, in San Diego, the only child of Lee Arthur Peterson and Jacqueline Peterson, known as Jackie. Those who knew him described someone naturally confident, socially at ease, and athletically capable. He had briefly considered professional golf before enrolling at Cal Poly, where he and Laci met. They married in August 1997 at Sycamore Mineral Springs Resort in Avila Beach. By October 2000, they had purchased a home at 523 Covina Avenue in Modesto. Scott worked in fertilizer sales at Trade Corp USA. Laci worked as a substitute teacher and kept a garden. They had a golden retriever named Mackenzie. In 2002, Laci found out she was pregnant. The due date was February 10th, 2003. They planned to name their son Connor. To everyone around them, nothing appeared out of place.
The evening of December 23rd, 2002, looked entirely ordinary. Laci and Scott visited Salon in Modesto, where her sister, Amy Rocha, worked. Amy cut Scott's hair that evening, as she did most months. Before leaving, Scott offered to collect a gift hamper Amy had ordered, telling her he would be near the retailer the following day because he planned to go golfing. He told the same story to several friends that night. Sharon Rocha spoke with Laci by phone around 8:30 that evening. It was a routine call. December 24th, 2002. Scott later told investigators he last saw Laci at approximately 9:30 in the morning. She was watching a cooking program and had mentioned plans to walk Mackenzie and bake cookies. He then said he drove to Berkeley Marina, 90 miles away, to take his newly purchased boat out fishing. He had bought the boat just weeks earlier and had no fishing license. The golfing story he had told Amy and their friends the night before did not match a solo fishing trip 90 miles from home. That same morning, neighbor Karen Service found Mackenzie wandering the street alone with his leash still attached. She logged the time at 10:18 a.m. Scott did not call Sharon Rocha until shortly after 5 that afternoon, asking if Laci was there. She was not. Sharon and Ron Gransky contacted police that evening. Detectives Alan Brocchini and John Bueller responded and became the lead investigators on the case. Detective Bueller would later say that from his very first conversation with Scott that night, something did not sit right.
By Christmas morning, the search for Laci Peterson had begun in earnest. Volunteers gathered at a local park that became a command post. Sharon and Dennis Rocha were there from the start, coordinating with search teams, handing out flyers, and staying present through every update. The neighborhood around Covina Avenue was canvassed. Tips came in. None of them led anywhere. Scott Peterson appeared at press conferences and vigils. He thanked volunteers publicly and spoke to reporters with a composed, measured tone. Investigators noticed early on that he rarely participated in the physical searches himself. His presence at public events was consistent. His absence from the actual search effort was equally consistent. By mid-January, Modesto police had placed him under active surveillance, tracking his movements around the clock. On January 16th, Scott spoke by phone with Brent Rocha, Laci's brother. During that call, Scott admitted he had been having an affair. Brent did not go to the press immediately, but what Scott told him in that conversation accelerated everything that followed. On January 24th, the Rocha family held a press conference. Brent Rocha stood before reporters and stated that the family was withdrawing their support from Scott Peterson. He was not angry about the affair itself. What he could not accept was what Scott had told the woman he was seeing, that he had no wife, that she was no longer in his life. He had told her that weeks before Laci ever went missing. 4 days later, on January 28th, Scott sat down with ABC's Diane Sawyer for a nationally televised interview. He described his marriage to Laci as glorious and claimed she had known about the affair. Neither claim was supported by anyone close to the family. Before we get into what investigators uncovered next, drop a comment below and tell us, based on everything you have heard so far, what stands out to you most about Scott Peterson's behavior during the search? We read every single comment. And if you are not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button right now. We break down true crime cases with verified facts and documented evidence every single week. Do not miss what comes next. While the search for Laci Peterson continued across Modesto, investigators were quietly building a picture of a second life Scott Peterson had been running in parallel. In October 2002, Scott attended a pest control trade conference in Anaheim. It was there that a mutual acquaintance, Sean Sibley, introduced him to Amber Frey, a massage therapist from Fresno. Scott told Amber he was single. The two began seeing each other. Their first date was November 20th, 2002, at which point Laci Peterson was 6 months pregnant. On December 9th, 2002, 15 days before Laci was reported missing, Scott told Amber that he no longer had a wife in his life and that this would be his first holiday season on his own. Amber had no reason to question it. On December 30th, Amber saw news coverage of the search for Laci Peterson. She recognized the husband immediately. She contacted Modesto police that same day. Investigators asked her to continue communicating with Scott, and to record every call going forward. She agreed. Amber hired attorney Gloria Allred, and on January 24, 2003, the same day the Rocha family held their press conference, Allred announced Amber's cooperation with law enforcement at a separate press event. The recordings that followed were significant. On New Year's Eve, while Scott was physically present at a candlelight vigil held in Laci's honor in Modesto, he called Amber and told her he was watching fireworks over the river in Paris. The call was recorded. The location data placed him in California. Two realities, one voice, all of it on tape. While Scott Peterson maintained his public composure, investigators Alan Brocchini and John Bueller were building a case from the ground up, one piece of documented evidence at a time. Cell site analysis placed Scott's phone near Berkeley Marina during the morning hours of December 24, 2002, consistent with his account of going fishing, but also placing him at the exact location that would later become significant to the case. A petrol receipt confirmed his route west that morning. A carpet fiber recovered from his truck was submitted for mitochondrial DNA testing. The result confirmed it belonged to Laci Peterson. Scott's boat, purchased just weeks before Laci went missing, showed traces of bay silt on the trailer. A plastic tarp retrieved from his storage unit contained sediment consistent with the floor of San Francisco Bay. He had no fishing license on the day he claimed to have gone out on the water. Investigators also documented that Scott had fabricated concrete anchors in his warehouse office in the weeks leading up to Christmas Eve. Their purpose was never explained. Forensic analysts ran tide and drift projections, calculating where something introduced into the water near Berkeley Marina in late December would surface by the following April. The result pointed directly to the shoreline near Point Isabel. On March 5, 2003, the case was formally reclassified. On April 13, 2003, two people walking near Point Isabel Regional Shoreline on the eastern edge of San Francisco Bay noticed something along the waterline that did not belong there. They contacted authorities. Officers from the Alameda County Sheriff's Office responded and secured the area. The following day, April 14th, a jogger came across a second discovery approximately 1 mile further along the same shoreline. Investigators from Alameda County processed both locations separately, working with the tide schedule and carefully documenting what the water had carried in. DNA testing was completed within days. On April 18, 2003, the results confirmed that the two individuals found along the shoreline were Laci Peterson and her son Connor, who had not yet been born at the time of her disappearance. The proximity of both discoveries to Berkeley Marina, the exact location Scott Peterson had placed himself on Christmas Eve, was not coincidental. The forensic tide projections investigators had run weeks earlier had pointed to this stretch of shoreline. The water had delivered exactly what the data predicted. That same evening, investigators from Modesto and San Mateo counties gathered for a joint briefing. Every piece of evidence they had built over 4 months converged on a single point. On April 18, 2003, the same day DNA results confirmed the identities of the two individuals found at Point Isabel, officers located Scott Peterson at a golf course in La Jolla, San Diego, approximately 500 miles from Modesto. He was driving a Mercedes registered to his brother. His hair and goatee had been dyed blonde,
Inside the vehicle, investigators found nearly $15,000 in cash, multiple cell phones, his brother's identification card, a map to the Canadian border, camping gear, and additional items that investigators later documented in the official inventory report. He did not resist. He was taken into custody without incident. Scott Peterson was formally charged that same day on 2 counts relating to the loss of Laci and Connor Peterson. The man who had spent months appearing on television asking for the public's help had been found 500 miles from home, with enough cash and documentation to suggest he was not planning to stay in the country.
We are heading into the trial now. And what happened inside that courtroom is something most people only know the surface of. Before we get there, drop a comment and tell us, do you think Scott Peterson planned this from the start? Or is there something about this case that still does not sit right with you? Subscribe and turn on notifications. The trial changes everything. The trial of Scott Peterson opened on June 1st, 2004, at the Superior Court of San Mateo County in Redwood City. The case had been moved from Modesto following a successful change of venue motion, citing the level of pre-trial publicity the case had generated across Stanislaus County. Judge Alfred DeLucci presided. The prosecution was led by Deputy District Attorney Rick DiStasso, joined by co-counsel Dave Harris. Defense attorney Mark Garagos represented Scott Peterson. Prosecutors argued that Scott had taken Laci out on his boat the morning of December 24th, that the concrete anchors he had fabricated in his warehouse were central to his plan, and that the forensic evidence connecting the marina to the shoreline discoveries supported their theory of what happened that morning. The case rested entirely on circumstantial evidence. There was no eyewitness, there was no confession. Amber Frey took the stand on the 6th day of testimony. The recorded calls were played in open court. Scott's voice, calm and deliberate, describing Paris and fireworks, while his wife had been missing for weeks. The courtroom heard the recordings without interruption. Mid-trial, juror Fran Gorman was dismissed after it was discovered she had spoken with Brent Rocha. She was replaced by alternate juror Rochelle Nice. Mark Garagos argued that witnesses had seen Laci walking in the neighborhood after Scott had left for Berkeley, and that the entire case against his client was built on circumstance rather than fact. The prosecution's closing described the sum of the evidence as, in their words, the geometry of intention. 23 weeks of testimony concluded in November 2004. On November 12, 2004, after deliberating for 7 days, the jury returned their verdict. The decision came back on both counts. The courtroom held still for several seconds after the clerk finished reading. Scott Peterson's expression did not change. On December 13, 2004, Judge Alfred DeLucci handed down his ruling. Sharon Rocha addressed the court directly. She told Scott Peterson that he would be forgotten, that Laci and Connor would not be. Scott Peterson made no statement. He was transferred to San Quentin State Prison. In August 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned the prior ruling on the grounds the jurors had been improperly screened during selection. The finding on the counts themselves was not affected.
In December 2021, Scott Peterson was formally resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of release. He has been held at Mule Creek State Prison ever since.
Scott Peterson is currently held at Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California. In March 2025, he was involved in an incident with a fellow inmate named Charles Miles during a recreational period. The matter was formally documented. In January 2024, the Los Angeles Innocence Project took on his case. The effort is led by Director Paula Mitchell and Deputy Director Hannah Brown. As part of that review, Judge Elizabeth Hill ordered DNA testing on a piece of duct tape found on Laci's clothing when she was identified in April 2003. In August 2025, Scott Peterson's legal team filed a third habeas petition presenting what they described as new evidence not previously considered at trial. The case has been covered in two major productions: the Netflix series American Murder, Laci Peterson, and the Peacock series Face to Face with Scott Peterson, released in 2024, in which Detective Alan Brocchini publicly disputed the innocence claims. Sharon Rocha published For Laci in 2006. It reached #1 on the New York Times nonfiction list. She also founded the Laci and Connor Search and Rescue Fund. In 2004, President George W. Bush signed federal legislation directly inspired by this case into law. It is known as Laci and Connor's Law. Laci Peterson was 27 years old, 8 months into her pregnancy, weeks away from meeting her son, when she was last seen on Christmas Eve 2002. Her case changed federal law and how investigators handle digital evidence in domestic cases. It has not fully closed. Drop a comment below. Tell us what you make of the LA Innocence Project's involvement. We read every comment. Subscribe and turn on notifications. There is more where this came from.